10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and those dear sweet humans beyond the binary. It is currently Wednesday, June 17th of this illustrious year 2020. And you can go all the way to the bank with the knowledge that it's bedtime, brother. It's bedtime, brother. It's Brother Bedtime. I'm Brother Bedtime, and it's bedtime, brother. Also, you don't have to go to the bank. You can go anywhere you like. You can go to the park. You can go to a reasonably sized gathering of humans, as long as they are equidistant apart, roughly 2 meters or so. You can go to sleep if you like. And that's probably the most sensible one, because it is bedtime. Nevertheless, I hope that you will stick around and enjoy this evening's edition. Look at the lighting in here, my goodness. It's so dark and even. I feel what's the word? Well, I don't know that there is a word for it, but just looking at the video makes me feel I feel like the lighting could use a little bit of work. But that's okay. You can see me, and more importantly, you can hear me. Hi, everybody. You look handsome. Oh, Space Jam. Shucks. Stop fishing. Nerds. Well, all right. On with the show then. Today was a good day for me, and I hope it was for you too. I spent most of it operating at a very high functioning level. I sent thousands of very important and nuanced emails to notable and powerful members of our community and beyond, and it felt good. It felt really good to be productive. I have a very good dwarf puttering about the space right now, fiddling with the lights, and I sense some imminent illumination. Big shout out to Sam with bells on, my moderator in real life and in the chat. Wasn't that mentioned in Frozen 2 or something? The notion that water has memory? It may very well have been. I'm afraid to say that I haven't seen any of the Frozen franchise. I'm aware that the song Let It Go has sort of come to dominate the Disney market in terms of popular show tunes. But that is kind of the extent of my knowledge. I think in my mind I often get it conflated with Ice Age and Ice Age 2, which I believe are in fact very different films. But I don't know for sure. Perhaps some research is in order. Oh, mercy. Frozen 2 is an anti-colonization narrative. Excellent. Cool. Is it good? Like, is it a good film? You know, there's lots of great films lots of not very great films about very good things. But is it an enjoyable visual experience? Would I enjoy it, Jamie? Maybe. C.S. Lewis, in his whole Prince Caspian thing, betrayed a shade of anti-colonialism sentiment when he spoke about how rude and rough the Telmarines were with the great beasts of Narnia, although it's not quite clear that that's what he's getting at. And I think referring to the uncolonized islands and continents as far as the Old English mindset is concerned, and them being full of this sort of pristine, idyllic community of magical and spiritual beings is of itself rather problematic. But we're not afraid of that here on the show. C.S. Lewis, we are willing to take in stride and give him the benefit of the doubt because his stories are just so compelling. Jamie, I don't know if you've been following along, but we just concluded the short chronicle of the adventures of Eustace, wherein they arrived on the island, which they later learned was home to Lord Octesian. Eustace full on was transmogrified into a dragon and had to have his skin eviscerated by Aslan in order for him to come back to his human form. And the whole shtick is kind of loaded with Christian symbology in terms of the being immersed into water to be born again, renewed and somehow purified. The dragon, of course, itself is a huge symbol of well, dragonish behavior, of putting the accumulation of wealth and the consumption of living organisms above all things, including socialization and compassion and all of that. Puff the Magic Dragon was a sort of exception to this in the past 50 or 60 years, but typically dragons are cast as the sort of archetypal bad force. They represent the great evil in most worlds. Hey Heather, welcome. McKinnon99, you made it. He was on your phone tonight. You both are on your phone tonight. Hope everyone is great. Well, I'm happy to confirm that everyone is in fact great. This chat is full of wonderful people who I'm thrilled to be sharing some time space with. Nevertheless, our friends have recently escaped the Dragon Island, as they imaginatively termed it, and they inscribed upon it, Dragon Island, discovered by Caspian X, King of Narnia, etc., in the 4th year of his reign. Here, as we suppose, the Lord Octesian had his death. And I guess it wasn't officially discovered by Lord Octesian because he had neither the tools of masonry to carve it into the wall himself, and he wasn't able to report back to his colonial friends that, hey everybody, I found a new island and it's mostly swine and birds and one big bad dragon. We don't know if the dragon was Octesian or if the dragon devoured Octesian, but nevertheless, that's the second time I've said nevertheless. That's probably enough for the next few weeks or so, wouldn't you say? Nevertheless, we are on the cusp of Chapter 8. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce my beverage for the night. This is a freshly brewed cup of Valerian root tea, Valerian Nights it's called, which I chose largely because of the word Valerian. It does in fact refer to a root that exists in the world, but it sounds remarkably fantastical. I'm feeling a bit fantastic myself tonight because I was enjoying well, it's hard to say if it's high magic or low magic at this point in the game, but it's called Northgard, and it sort of embraces the old Norse mythology. I haven't encountered any fantastic creatures yet, but it would not shock me to be visited by Odin or Freya. The pre-show music, as I mentioned in the chat, was Age of Wonders, an old, a rather old turn-based fantasy grand empire building experience where you can play as such well-known and beloved races as the Hobbits, or the Frostlings, or Goblins, not to be confused with, of course, the Orcs. But the soundtrack is really what stands out for me, so that's what we were listening to. Here's to you, everybody. Lance is here, but we are both listening on your phone, Heather. Wonderful. Well, I'm glad you made it, and thanks for tuning in, everybody. Shall we get into it? I invite you to sit back, relax, take a nice, deep, cleansing breath, etc., etc. Align your chakras with your perineum and, crack your knuckles, whatever you do to relax. And enjoy Chapter 8. 2 Narrow Escapes. Everyone was cheerful as the Dawn Treader sailed from Dragon Island. They had fair winds as soon as they were out of the bay, and came early next morning to the unknown land which some of them had seen when flying over the mountains while Eustace was still a dragon. It was a low, green island, inhabited by nothing but rabbits and a few goats, but from the ruins of stone huts, and from blackened places where fires had been, they judged that it had been peopled not long before. There were also some broken bones and broken weapons. "Pirates' work," said Caspian. "Or the dragons," said Edmund. The only other thing they found here was a little skin boat, or coracle, on the sands. It was made of hide, stretched over a wicker framework. It was a tiny boat, barely 4 feet long, and the paddle which lay in it was and the paddle which still lay in it was in proportion. They thought that either it had been made for a child, or else the people of that country had been dwarves. Reepicheep decided to keep it, as it was just the right size for him, so it was taken on board. They called that land Burnt Island, and sailed away before noon. That was rather efficient exploration, wasn't it? For some 5 days they ran down before a southeast wind, a south-southeast wind, that is, out of sight of all lands and seeing neither fish nor gull. Then they had a day that rained hard till the afternoon. Eustace lost 2 games of chess to Reepicheep, and began to get like his old and disagreeable self again, and Edmund said he wished they could have gone to America with Susan. Oh, Edmund, I guarantee you, whatever you're doing in Narnia, it's pretty much definitely going to be better than anything you could be doing in America. Maybe not in the 1950s, but I'm reasonably certain. Then Lucy looked out of the stern windows and said, "Hello, I do believe it's stopping. And what's that?" They all tumbled up to the poop at this and found that the rain had stopped, and that Drinian, who was on watch, was also staring hard at something astern. Or rather, at several things. They looked a little like smooth, rounded rocks, a whole line of them, with intervals of about 40 feet in between. "But they can't be rocks," Drinian was saying, "because they weren't there 5 minutes ago." "And one's just disappeared," said Lucy. "Yes, and there's another one coming up," said Edmund. "And nearer," said Eustace. "Hang it," said Caspian. "The whole thing is moving this way." "And moving a great deal quicker than we can sail, sire," said Drinian. "It'll be up with us in a minute." They all held their breath, for is not it all nice to be pursued by an unknown something either on land or sea? But what it turned out to be was far worse than anyone had suspected. Suddenly, only about the length of a cricket pitch from their port side, an appalling head reared itself out of the ocean. It was all greens and vermilions with purple blotches, except where shellfish clung to it, and shaped rather like a horse's, though without ears. It had enormous eyes made for staring through the dark depths of the ocean, and a gaping mouth filled with double rows of sharp fish-like teeth. This is awesome. I feel like H.P. Lovecraft would be proud. Hail daggone, baby. It came up on what they first took to be a huge neck. But as more and more of it emerged, everyone knew that this was not its neck, but its body, and that at last they were seeing what so many people have foolishly wanted to see: the great sea serpent. The folds of its gigantic tail could be seen far away, rising at intervals with the surface. And now its head was towering up higher than the mast. Every man rushed to his weapons, but there was nothing to be done. The monster was out of reach. "Shoot! Shoot!" cried the master bowman, and several obeyed, but the arrows glanced off the sea serpent's hide as if it was iron-plated. Then, for a dreadful minute, everyone was still, staring up at its eyes and mouth, and wondering where it would pounce. But it didn't pounce. It shot its head forward across the mast on a level with the yard of the mast. Now its head was just beside the fighting top. Still it stretched and stretched till its head was over the starboard bulwark. Then down it began to come, not onto the crowded deck, but into the water, so that the whole ship was under an arch of serpent. And almost at once that arch began to get smaller. Indeed, on the starboard, the sea serpent was now almost touching the Dawn Treader's side. Eustace, who had really been trying very hard to behave well, till the rain and the chess put him back, now did the very first brave thing he had ever done. He was wearing a sword that Caspian had lent him, As soon as the serpent's body was near enough on the starboard side, he jumped onto the bulwark and began hacking at it with all his might. It is true that he accomplished nothing beyond breaking Caspian's second-best sword into bits, but it was a fine thing for a beginner to have done. What a fearsome strength the children have in Narnia, even against the hide of a sea serpent, to shatter a king's second-best sword not only into one piece, but into bits, would take a good deal of work. Others would have joined him, if at that moment Reepicheep had not called out, "Don't fight! Push!" It was so unusual for the mouse to advise anyone not to fight that, even in that terrible moment, every eye turned to him. And when he jumped up onto the bulwark, forward of the snake, he set his little furry back against its huge, scaly, slimy back, and began pushing as hard as he could. Quite a number of people saw what he meant, and rushed to both sides of the ship to do the same. And when a moment later the sea serpent's head appeared again, this time on the port side, and this time with its back to them, then everyone understood. The brute had made a loop of itself round the Dawn Treader, and was beginning to draw the loop tight. When it got quite tight, snap! There would be floating matchwood where the ship had been, and it could pick them out of the water one by one. Their only chance was to push the loop backward till it slid over the stern, or else, to put the same thing another way, to push the ship forward out of the loop. Reepicheep alone had, of course, no more chance of doing this than of lifting up a cathedral, but he had nearly killed himself with trying before others shoved him aside. Very soon the whole ship's company, except Lucy and the mouse, which was fainting, was in two long lines along the two bulwarks, each man's chest to the back of the man in front, so that the weight of the whole line was in the last man, pushing for their lives. For a few sickening seconds, which seemed like hours, nothing appeared to happen. Joints cracked, sweat dropped, breath came in grunts and gasps. Then they felt that the ship was moving. They saw that the snake loop was further from the mast than it had been, but they also saw that it was smaller. And now the real danger was at hand. Could they get it over the poop, or was it already too tight? Yes, it would just fit. It was resting on the poop rails. A dozen or more sprang up on the poop. This was far better. The sea serpent's body was so low now that they could make a line across the poop and push side by side. Hope rose high till everyone remembered the high-carved stern, the dragon tail of the Dawn Treader. It would be quite impossible to get the brute over that. "An axe!" cried Caspian hoarsely. "And still shove!" Lucy, who knew where everything was, heard him where she was standing on the main deck, staring up at the poop. Oh man, that fruit hangs so low it wobbles to and fro. But just as she reached the top, there came a great crashing noise like a tree coming down, and the ship rocked and darted forward. For at that very moment, whether because the sea serpent was being pushed so hard, or because it foolishly decided to draw the noose tight, the whole of the carved stern broke off, and the ship was free. The others, my goodness. Very evocative, Clive. I'm sorry, everybody. I can't resist a nice low-hanging fruit like a good bit of poop on the ship. I think we're through the worst of it, though. I mean, how much poop can one chapter have? The others were too exhausted to see what Lucy saw. There, a few yards behind them, the loop of sea serpent's body got rapidly smaller and disappeared into a splash. Lucy always said, but of course she was very excited at the moment, and it may have been only imagination, that she saw a look of idiotic satisfaction on the creature's face. What is certain is that it was a very stupid animal, for instead of pursuing the ship, it turned its head round and began nosing all along its own body, as if it expected to find the wreckage of the Dawn Treader there. But the Dawn Treader was already well away, running before a fresh breeze, and the men lay and sat panting and groaning all about the deck, till presently they were able to talk about it, and then to laugh about it. And when some rum had been served out, they even raised a cheer, and everyone praised the valor of Eustace, though it hadn't done any good, and of Reepicheep. Well, isn't that nice? After this, they sailed for 3 days more, and saw nothing but sea and sky. On the 4th day, the wind changed to the north, and the seas began to rise. By the afternoon, it had nearly become a gale. But at that time, they sighted land on their port bow. "By your leave, sire," said Drinian, "we will try to get under the lee of that country by rowing and lie in harbour, maybe till this is over." Caspian agreed, but a long row against the gale did not bring them to the land before evening. By the last light of that day, they steered into a natural harbour and anchored, but no one went ashore that night. In the morning, they found themselves in the green bay of a rugged, lonely-looking country, which sloped up to a rocky summit. From the windy north, beyond that summit, clouds came streaming rapidly. They lowered the boat and loaded her with any of the water casks, which were now empty. "Which stream shall we water at, Drinian?" said Caspian, as he took his seat in the stern sheets of the boat. There seemed to be 2 coming down into the bay. "It makes little odds, sire," said Drinian, "but I think it's a shorter pull to that one on the starboard, the eastern one." "Here comes the rain," said Lucy. "I should think it does," said Edmund, for it was already pelting hard. "I say, let's go to the other stream. There are trees there, and we'll have some shelter." "Yes, let's," said Eustace. "No point in getting wetter than we need." But all the time, Drinian was steadily steering to the starboard, like tiresome people in cars who continue at 40 miles an hour while you explaining to them that they are on the wrong road. "They're right, Drinian," said Caspian. "Why don't you bring her head round and make for the western streams?" "As your majesty pleases," said Drinian, a little shortly. He had had an anxious day with the weather yesterday, and he didn't like advice from landsmen. But he altered course, and it turned out afterward that it was a good thing he did. I wonder why. Mulric, welcome. Late but here in full effect. Oh, my goodness. To catch you up to speed, they departed from the island, from Dragon Island, where Eustace had his remarkable transformation, and spent a few happy days at sea before encountering a sea serpent. Is this Slavery Island? I don't know. Are there more slaves? The slaves they encountered, or Caspian was made a slave back in chapter 3 by the slaver Pug. And they've already had the great hurrah of reinstating Lord Byrne as the governor and shutting down the slave trade in the Lone Islands. And we just had the Dragon Island, where we had Eustace's transmogrification and eventual healing at the great paws of Aslan himself. And we just came away from them narrowly escaping a sea serpent's clutches. Thanks in due part to the valor of Reepicheep, and credit where credit is due, Eustace gave a very good showing. Yeah, so I have no idea what this particular island will be. But it has 2 streams, and they've decided at last to veer for the one with trees near it to avoid the rain. And it turned out afterward that it was a good thing he did. I suppose we'll find out why. By the time they had finished watering, the rain was over, and Caspian, with Eustace, the Pevensies, and Reepicheep, decided to walk up to the top of the hill and see what could be seen. It was a stiffish climb through coarse grass and heather, and they saw neither man nor beast, except seagulls. When they reached the top, they saw that it was a very small island, not more than 20 acres, and from this height the sea looked larger and more desolate than it did from the deck, or even the fighting top, of the Dawn Treader. "Crazy, you know," said Eustace to Lucy in a low voice, looking at the eastern horizon. "Sailing on and on into that, with no idea what we may get to." But he only said it out of habit, not really nastily, as he would have done at one time. And I gotta say, I'm kind of with Eustace on this one. It seems wild to me that people would set sail without provisions enough to return home. But I suppose that's the nature of adventure. You make a go of it. It was too cold to stay long on the ridge, for the wind still blew freshly from the north. "Don't let's go back the same way," said Lucy as they turned. "Let's go along a bit and come down by the other stream, the one Drinian wanted to go to." Everyone agreed to this, and after about 15 minutes they were at the source of the second river. It was a more interesting place than they had expected, a deep little mountain lake, surrounded by cliffs, except for a narrow channel on the seaward side, out of which the water flowed. Here at last they were out of the wind, and all sat down in the heather above the cliff for a rest. All sat down, but one, it was Edmund, All sat down, but one, it was Edmund, jumped up again very quickly. "They go in for sharp stones on this island," he said, groping about in the heather. "Where is the wretched thing? Ah, now I've got it. Hullo! It wasn't a stone at all. It's a sword hilt. No, by Jove, it's a whole sword. What the rust has left of it. It must have lain here for ages." "Narnian, too, by the look of it," said Caspian, as they all crowded round. "I'm sitting on something too," said Lucy. "Something hard." It turned out to be the remains of a mail shirt. By this time everyone was on hands and knees, feeling in the thick heather in every direction. Their search revealed, one by one, a helmet, a dagger, and a few coins. Not Calorman crescents, but genuine Narnian lions and trees, such as you might see at any day in the marketplace of Beaversdam or Baruna. "Looks as if this might be all that's left of one of our 7 lords," said Edmund. "Just what I was thinking," said Caspian. "I wonder which it was. There's nothing on the dagger to show. And I wonder how he died." "And how we are to avenge him," added Reepicheep. Edmund, the only one of the party who had read several detective stories, had meanwhile been thinking. As we all know in this modern era, reading several detective stories is the bare minimum for being able to do some thinking. On that note, I can highly recommend The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. That's my favorite detective story, and it has provided me with the capacity to think about a great many things. "Look here," he said. "There's something very fishy about this. He can't have been killed in a fight." "Why not?" asked Caspian. "No bones," said Edmund. "An enemy might take the armor and leave the body. But who ever heard of a chap that won a fight carrying away the body and leaving the armor?" "Perhaps he was killed by a wild animal," Lucy suggested. "It'd be a clever animal," said Edmund, "that would take a man's mail shirt off." "Perhaps a dragon," said Caspian. "Nothing doing," said Eustace. "A dragon couldn't do it. I ought to know." Oh, Eustace, dishing out the truth bombs. Yeah, also, Raymond Chandler is not a children's book. It contains several graphic scenes. Well, let's get away from the place anyway, said Lucy. She had not felt like sitting down again since Edmund had raised the question of bones. If you like, said Caspian, getting up. I don't think any of this stuff is worth taking away. They came down and round to the little opening where the stream came out of the lake, and stood looking at the deep water within the circle of cliffs. If it had been a hot day, no doubt some would have been tempted to bathe, and everyone would have had a drink. Indeed, even as it was, Eustace was on the very point of stooping down and scooping up some water in his hands, when Reepicheep and Lucy both at the same moment cried, "Look!" so that he forgot about his drink, and looked into the water. The bottom of the pool was made of large, grayish-blue stones, and the water was perfectly clear. And on the bottom lay a life-size figure of a man, made, apparently, of gold. It lay face downward, with its arms stretched out above its head. And it so happened that as they looked at it, the clouds parted and the sun shone out. The golden shape was lit up from end to end. Lucy thought it was the most beautiful statue she had ever seen. Here we can see our company of would-be adventurers. Well, I guess they've earned the qualifier of adventurers by now. Peering into the lake. Let's see if we can get this bad boy to focus. Sounds trappish? Yeah, Mulric. I'm getting serious, like, King Midas vibes here. But even more so than that, The Life of Pi. Has anyone here read The Life of Pi before? There's an island that Pi discovers later in the book, well towards the end. And I won't spoil it by telling you what the island is all about, but that was my first thought about this strange island that they seem to have stumbled upon. Well, whistled Caspian. That was worth coming to see. I wonder, can we get it out? We can dive for it, sire, said Reepicheep. No good at all, said Edmund. At least, if it's really gold, solid gold, it'll be far too heavy to bring up. And that pool's 12 or 15 feet deep if it's an inch. Half a moment, though. It's a good thing I brought a hunting spear with me. Let's see what the depth is like. Hold on to my hand, Caspian, while I lean out over the water a bit. Caspian took his hand, and Edmund, leaning forward, began to lower his spear into the water. Before it was halfway in, Lucy said, I don't believe the statue is gold at all. It's only the light. Your spear looks just the same color. What's wrong? Asked Edmund, several voices at once, for Edmund had suddenly let go of the spear. I couldn't hold it, gasped Edmund. It seemed so heavy. And there it is on the bottom now, said Caspian. And Lucy is right. It looks just the same color as the statue. But Edmund, who appeared to be having some trouble with his boots, at least he was bending down and looking at them, straightened himself all at once and shouted out in the sharp voice which people hardly ever disobey, Get back! Back from the water, all of you, at once! They all did, and stared at him. Look, said Edmund. Look at the toes of my boots. They look a bit yellow, began Eustace. They're gold, solid gold, interrupted Edmund. Look at them, feel them. The leather's pulled away from it already, and they're as heavy as lead. By Aslan, said Caspian, you don't mean to say? Yes, I do, said Edmund. That water turns things into gold. It turned the spear into gold. That's why it got so heavy. And it was just lapping against my feet. It's a good thing I wasn't barefoot. And it turned the toe caps into gold. And that poor fellow on the bottom, well, You see, so it isn't a statue at all, said Lucy in a low voice. No, the whole thing is plain now. He was here on a hot day. He undressed on top of the cliff where we were sitting. The clothes have rotted away or been taken by birds to line nests with. The armor's still there. Then he dived and... Don't, said Lucy. What a horrible thing. And what a narrow shave we've had, said Edmund. Narrow indeed, said Reepicheep. Anyone's finger, anyone's foot, anyone's whisker or anyone's tail might have slipped into the water at any moment. All the same, said Caspian, we may as well test it. He stooped down and wrenched up a spray of heather. Then, very cautiously, he knelt beside the pool and dipped it in. It was heather that he dipped. What he drew out was a perfect model of heather, made of the purest gold, heavy and soft as lead. The king who owned this island, said Caspian, and his face flushed as he spoke, would soon be the richest of all kings in the world. I claim this land forever as a Narnian possession. It shall be called Goldwater Island, and I bind all of you to secrecy. No one must know of this, not even Drinian, on pain of death. Do you hear? Who are you talking to? Said Edmund. I'm no subject of yours. If anything, it's the other way round. I am one of the 4 ancient sovereigns of Narnia, and you are under allegiance to the High King, my brother. So it has come to that, King Edmund, has it? Said Caspian, laying his hand on his sword hilt. Oh, stop it, both of you, said Lucy. That's the worst of doing anything with boys. You're all such swaggering, bullying idiots. Go. Her voice died away into a gasp, and everyone else saw what she had seen. Across the grey hillside above them, grey, for the heather was not yet in bloom, without noise, and without looking at them, and shining as if he were in bright sunlight though the sun had in fact gone, passed with slow pace the hugest lion that human eyes have ever seen. In describing the scene, Lucy said afterward, he was the size of an elephant, though at another time she only said the size of a cart horse. But it was not the size that mattered. Nobody dared to ask what it was. They knew it was Aslan, and nobody ever saw how or where he went. They looked at one another like people waking from sleep. What were we talking about? Said Caspian. Have I been making rather an ass of myself? Sire, said Reepicheep, this is a place with a curse on it. Let us get back on board at once, and if I might have the honor of naming this island, I should call it Deathwater. That strikes me as a very good name, Reep, said Caspian, though now that I come to think of it, I don't know why. But the weather seems to be settling, and I dare say Drinian would like to be off. What a lot we shall have to tell him. But in fact, they had not much to tell, for the memory of that last hour had become confused. Their Majesties all seem a bit bewitched when they came aboard, said Drinian to Rince when some hours later the Dawn Treader was once more under sail, and Deathwater Island already below the horizon. Something happened to them in that place. The only thing I could get clear was that they think they've found the body of one of these lords we're looking for. You don't say so, Captain, answered Rince. Well, that's 3. Only 4 more. At this rate, we might be home soon after the new year. And a good thing, too. My backie's running a bit low. Good night, sir. Oh, man, his backie's running low. That's got to be tobacco. Aslan is very disappointed. Yeah, absolutely. Woof. I mean, remarkable. So Aslan in the first book, that is, by the way, the end of the chapter. Was there a picture to show? He asked himself aloud. I don't think there was. No, indeed. Oh, that was a narrow shave. The whole becoming bewitched by the prospect of wealth is, very dragonish, really. I played through a game called Shadowrun, which is specifically Shadowrun Director's Cut. Return to Shadowrun. Anyways, the point is that at the end of the game, you meet one of the dragons that has reemerged in the modern world and is now one of its rulers. Basically, the equivalent of some high-powered CEO with eternal life and limitless power. And he talks about how it is the nature of humans to reproduce, which leans into that old maxim, be fruitful and multiply, to make more of ourselves and to spread. It is in the nature of the dragon to accumulate. And that in that world, it is postulated that eventually there will only be one dragon left sitting on the entire pile of gold that is the planet Earth. And this incidence with the golden water smacks of that notion to me. That was a fun chapter, said Cat Eyes Luca. Yeah, I agree. Nothing solves riddles like amnesia. Yeah, Aslan has this great way of showing up like the Men in Black and just being like, pay no attention to the evil. And and that seems to do the trick, you know? Even Eustace wasn't sure if what he had experienced was a dream. I guess there's something transcendent about the experience of encountering the god of a world. Who'd have thunk? Oh, mercy. Valerian root, that's good stuff. Well, this has been a lot of fun, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow night with Chapter 9 of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. This is the girthiest novel of the series that we have encountered so far. A good 40 pages or so longer than Prince Caspian, the last book we read. So I anticipate we'll be spending more time with the Dawn Treader for at least another week or two, maybe a week and a half, we'll see. Nevertheless, tomorrow night we will be doing our 2 chapters. I've decided to make Thursdays a bit of a longer affair, a bit of a more extended, drawn-out, languorous, luxurious evening to spend together. So I hope you'll check us out tomorrow evening for Chapter 9 and 10 of Clive Staples' eponymous book. I don't know that I used the word eponymous right, but I'm going to stand by it because people don't use the word eponymous nearly enough, correctly or incorrectly. Mulric says, thank you, and thanks for catching me up. Anytime, Mulric. Same goes for anybody in chat. If ever you show up halfway through the stream and you're not sure what's going on, feel free to just say so in the chat and I'll find a suitable opportunity to catch you up. This is a pretty informal storytelling sesh. Eponymous is someone giving their name to something. Yeah, definitely the incorrect usage of that word then. What a trip this is turning into. Yeah, you said it, Heath. Oh, mercy. Nevertheless, folks, I hope you stayed dry today, wherever you are. In Edmonton, it was quite windy and rainy for most of the day, though it's cleared up a little bit, still pretty overcast. But wherever you are in the world, I hope the weather is kind to you and, at the very least, thematically appropriate for your moods. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you all back here tomorrow night for more adventures in the land of Narnia. Good night, moon, and good night, stars. Good night, trucks, and good night, cars. Good night, shoes, and good night, hats. Good night, dogs, and good night, cats. Good night to friends and family. Good night to you, and good night to me. Sweet dreams, everybody. Have a great sleep.